In this video, we're going to be discussing Rabbi Yehuda Leib of Shpola, known as the Shpoler Zeide, or the grandfather of Shpola, which is a city somewhere in Ukraine. He was born in the year 1724. He passed away in the year 1791. The story of his birth goes as follows. Apparently, when the Baal Shem Tov was still an unknown figure, he was traveling the country. He once stopped at an inn that belonged to the parents of the Shpoler Zeide, and at that time they did not. They were. I don't know if they had children. I think they had other children, but they were much older. And as basically his custom was that if a couple came together and they had children, then he would put them in give them their own room. But if they didn't have children, he felt that perhaps they weren't really married, and therefore he would give them each separate accommodations. And that's what he did. But the Baal Shem Tov came. At that time he did not have children, and him and his wife, he gave them separate accommodations. And that evening, as he's going around his estate to check it out, he sees that one of the cabins is a tremendous light coming out. So he goes to this cabin and he sees that the Baal Shem Tov, he thought perhaps it was on fire. So he goes and he sees the Baal Shem Tov is studying, and there's this person with him, and there's a tremendous light shining, and he realized this person is a great, great person. And the Baal Shem Tov tells him that he asked forgiveness for the Baal Shem Tov for treating him like a regular person. And he says, no, that's how I want to be treated. You're doing the right thing, and by giving me and my wife separate accommodations. And he gives him a blessing that he's going to have a child, a baby boy. A year later, he has a baby boy. And he asks the Baal Shem Tov that he should come to the bris. And the Baal Shem Tov, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, does come back, still disguised as a regular poor person, and he tells him, gives him like a sign, like, don't make a big deal out of me. But he wanted that the Baal Shem Tov should give his boy at the bris, should give him a blessing. So he says, he comes up with this idea. Why not give everybody, he said, my custom is that I pass the baby around and everybody gets to bless the child. So everybody, he passes around the child, and when it comes to the Baal Shem Tov puts his hands on the child and he says, I'm an ignorant person, I don't know much, but I know that it says in the Torah of Avraham Zaken, and Avraham was old, that Avraham was the Zeide, the grandfather of all the Jewish people. Like Avraham was old, so he was the Zeide of the Jewish people, so I'm giving you a blessing that you give me this child a blessing, he should be a Zeide. And that is how he got the name of the Zeide, the grandfather of Shpola, later of Shpola. So he became known, even as a baby, as the Zeide, the grandfather. It says in some Hasidic texts that when he was 3 years old, he met the Baal Shem Tov again, and this time he was told that the Baal Shem Tov, it says that the Baal Shem Tov put his hand on his heart, and from them he became a warm person. He became a changed person just by this one act of the Baal Shem Tov putting his hand on this child's heart. Eventually, he became a student of Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz, and the Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz was a student of the Baal Shem Tov, and eventually Rabbi Pinchas of Koretz said that he should meet the Baal Shem Tov, and the Baal Shem Tov told him that his mission was to go into exile. When he first met the Baal Shem Tov, he actually fainted, and he said, that was the man with the hoe. I said, what is that? What's the story? Before his soul came down on this earth, his soul didn't want to come down. So he said, I have conditions for my soul to come down. The high heavens agreed to 3 of the conditions, but would not agree to the 4th. So his soul was languishing wherever, somewhere in the Garden of Eden. And eventually he said one time he sees a man carrying a hoe over his shoulder, and he says, I am hoeing these fields, trying to help the Jewish people, and you aren't willing to help me. And he was very scared. His soul was very scared of this, and decided that yes, it was time for his soul to come down. And his soul came down, and then when he met the Baal Shem Tov, he right away recognized him as the man that he had encountered as a soul. So there are many stories about the Shpoler Zeide during his time of exile, and maybe we'll talk about some of them in a minute. Eventually, what he would do is he would go to a place and he would encourage the Jewish people there, again, as hiding his identity. He wasn't a known person at the time. And eventually he came to this city called Zlatopola, and the way it worked over there was if somebody could read the Torah, they were the rabbi, essentially. And at some point, he became very well known over there, and that's kind of where he was there for a few years, and eventually he moved to the town of Shpola, where he became known as the Shpoler Zeide. He also at some point became a student of the Toldos of Rabbi Yaakov Yosef of Polano, and eventually through that he became connected to the Maggid of Mezrich, the successor of the Baal Shem Tov. During his exile, the Baal Shem Tov had passed away, and he became a student of the Maggid as well, and became acquainted with many of the other Hasidic masters who were students of the Maggid. Just a little bit about his connection with the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shpoler Zeide of Liadi. There's a story that now the Shpoler Zeide was one of the oldest students of the Maggid, because he had been a student also of the Baal Shem Tov, born in 1724. Rabbi Shpoler Zeide was born in 1745, so at least 20 years older. And essentially, he honored the Alter Rebbe a lot. There's a story that one time the Alter Rebbe came to Shpola, and he went out to greet him, and he told everybody to clean the synagogue. We're having an important guest, and he said the Torah is coming. And this story goes that they came to walk together to the Beis Medrash, to the synagogue, and the Alter Rebbe, he actually picked up the Alter Rebbe, and he said, "We're going to do hakafas with a living Sefer Torah." So that is the story of that. They also, when some of the other students of the Maggid accused the Alter Rebbe of not following in the ways of their teacher, many came to his defense, excuse me, as well as the Shpoler Zeide. There's different stories about that, but essentially the Shpoler Zeide, according to one version of the story, actually said he's going to stay out of this. He's not going to attack the Alter Rebbe. And another version of the story is that he came to ask the Alter Rebbe, some questions about his conduct and his books. And he heard the Alter Rebbe learning Torah, and he's learning what it says that when two people are holding on to a garment, and two people are holding on to the garment, then you're supposed to split it. But when the Alter Rebbe learned it, he said, if one person is holding on to a garment, the other person is holding on to another garment. The Alter Rebbe said, the will of God is that this garment should be split. And he said, if someone learns Torah like that everything is infused with godliness, there can be no questions about him. And there's many other stories as well. He also had a famous dispute with Rabbi Nachman of Breslov. Apparently they would trade barbs, and it's not so clear what the argument, what the debate was about. It was clearly something very, very spiritual, because when the Rabbi Nachman of Breslov passed away, the Shpoler Zeide was very broken, and some say that actually Rabbi Nachman of Breslov passed away, I believe, at a very young age, in his 30s, and therefore he felt that maybe if he would kind of give it to him a little bit in this world, he would be able to survive and receive some punishment, so to speak, that therefore he would be able to live longer. As there's a funny story with the Ruzhiner that we spoke about previously, that one time somebody said that I was once at the Shpoler Zeide, and he told me that I can never have children. So he said, well, if that's the case, then I'm sure the Breslover would have said the opposite. So therefore, and I agree with him, and therefore you'll have children. It could be the story was the opposite, but the point is that apparently this is a very well-known dispute that they had. One of the famous stories is this, and this is something that is observed by his descendants until today, is this holiday on the 19th day of Shvat is the day that he was saved. Apparently he was drowning, and his in icy water, his attendant jumped in and saved his life. Unfortunately, he passed away, but the Shpoler Zeide was saved, and he decreed that all his descendants should celebrate this day as the day of his rescue, as it is in the code of Jewish law. Until today, on the 19th day of Shvat, many descendants of the Shpoler Zeide make a seuda, make a meal and a celebration. He passed away when his children did not succeed him. Apparently, this was one of his conditions that his soul made before it came down to this earth, was that his children would not be great scholars. The idea was that he wanted to show God that just because your children don't turn out to be the most wonderful people in the world and to have all your expectations, we still love our children unconditionally. And therefore, God should love the Jewish people, even though we may not fulfill his expectations. So we see how much he loved Jewish people, and he loved his fellow Jews to the point that he wanted his children should not succeed him. However, many of his descendants became prominent rabbis, and there are families of those descendants until this day. We'll talk a couple of stories about him. There's a famous story, is the story of Hub Kazak. So apparently, one of the famous things that he would do was he would dance Friday night. He would have this wonderful dance, and people would come to watch him dance Friday night during Kabbalah Shabbos, the acceptance of Shabbos. And he once said the story of how he learned to dance, that he actually learned to dance from Elijah the prophet. Very interesting story. I'll say it quickly, but essentially the story was that he was helping a family who was imprisoned in a debtor's prison by the local landlord, and for not paying their rent on his estate. It's called the Parrots back then in that area of Poland and Ukraine. And this, again, during his exile and his travels. And he found out that that he couldn't raise the money that they needed for the rent, but he found out that coming up soon is the birthday of this Parrots, and the way it would work is they would throw a bear suit into the dungeon where these people were. The bear, this person wearing this clunky bear suit, would have to come and dance with the Parrots and his guests. If he could outdance the Parrots, then he would be forgiven. He would be forgiven his debt. And of course, it was a rigged game. There's no way in the world that a person who's sitting languishing in a dungeon could outdance somebody who's well trained in dance. And of course, the clunky bear suit doesn't help, and the fact that they're in a dungeon, probably doesn't help either. So it was just entertainment for the Parrots and his cruel guests. And he decides that he's going to do this. And essentially, the night before, Elijah the prophet comes and teaches him how to dance. And he comes and he puts on this bear suit. And of course, they don't know who he is because he's wearing a bear suit. He doesn't know that he's not the debtor. And he comes and he outdances this Parrots, and on all these different Pazatskas and Kazatskas and all these different, fancy dances that I'm not so familiar with, and he outdances him, and he basically forces him to grant them clemency and give them free rent for the foreseeable future, so they could make a living. And by that, he saves his family. So Elijah the prophet himself taught him how to dance, and there's a song associated with the story called Hup Kazak, which means get up, Kazak, and it's a famous song. I'm not going to sing it right now. You can Google it, Hup Kazak. It's a famous song that's attributed to this story and the Shpoler Zeide. Another one of his songs is called Kol Bayar, which is a song that it's a story of a child who goes to the forest and is looking for his father, and it's a song that's in 3 languages: in Russian, Hebrew, Yiddish, and some Russian or Ukrainian dialect. It's also a beautiful song. A couple different versions of it, and essentially it's a parable for the Jewish people looking for God and God looking for the Jewish people. It's a beautiful song. Okay, now we'll finish up with a couple of interesting controversies about the person, Rabbi of Shpola, the Shpoler Zeide. Number one is, what was his name? Was his name Yehuda Leib, or was his name Arya Leib? So far in this video, we addressed him as Yehuda Leib. There's a famous book that's written about him that says that his name was Arya Leib. However, it seems that we actually have now a letter signed by him that says Yehuda Leib. as well as he was named after his ancestor, the Maharal of Prague, whose name was Yehuda Leib. So it makes a lot of sense that his name was Yehuda Leib, and also his descendants put out pushkas, charity boxes that said that if you give charity in this great tzaddik's merit, you will be blessed. And the name over there says Yehuda Leib. Now, the other controversy is, was he the same person known as Reb Leib Saras? There was a person whose name was Reb Leib Saras. He was a Talmud he was a student of the Maggid of Mizrich as well. He also would travel and would go around to different places, and so similar kind of life story. His name was also Leib, and so there seems to be a debate whether or not he is the same person as the Shpoler Zeide. Now, what are the reasons to say that he is not the same person? Number one is they both have these days of celebration of their rescue from a tragedy, and they have different descendants, and each of them have a different day. They have their mothers' names are different. Reb Leib, his mother's name was Sarah, a very famous story about how we're not going to get into now, but a very famous story of how he was called by his mother's name, versus I believe the Shpoler Zeide's name was Bracha. And so they have different families that claim that they claim to be descended from one and not the other, and they have different days, and they have different mothers' names. So that's the kind of the debate. The Lubavitch Rebbe discussed this once at a Farbrengen, and people said to him it doesn't make sense that they would be the same person. And the Rebbe said, if he were to find two different tombstones with two different names on it, one said the Shpoler Zeide and one said Reb Leib Saras, he would believe that they were two different people. And the Rebbe seems to be it was very suspect that they were two different people. He seemed to view it as they were the same person. As for the controversies of whether they have different mothers' names, he says that we see many. There's debate about many people's mother's name. There's other great rabbis' mother's names, and these kind of details are easily explained compared to their life stories seem to be very similar. In more recent years, they actually did find a tombstone. At that time, the only tombstone known was that of Reb Leib Saras, and later there was a tombstone found in the city of Shpola but it doesn't say his name. So the controversy lives on because it doesn't actually say that this is a different person. So that is the debate. However, either way, we're definitely talking about a great tzaddik, a great person whose legacy of Ahavas Yisrael, of love for a fellow Jew, lives on to this day. Thank you very much for joining us. Have a happy Hanukkah, and we'll see you next time.